Welcome to another episode of Info Vids. I'm your Tokusatsu tour guide, and today I'll be talking about the Metal Heroes franchise. A franchise that's recently, in some shape or form, rebirthed on the scene, and it's something I'm also familiar with, and I felt like covering this and just giving you of basic information, when it started, basic premise, stuff like that, then to now, things of that nature, to get everybody up to speed, since these characters have been recently reappearing again, and hopefully, in my heart, at some point in time, they actually get a series again. But, alright, moving on, let's get the ball rolling. In 1982, Toei added a new live-action superhero series to its existing staples in Space Sheriff Gavan, or Gokaiger Gavan. Any way you want to say it, it's the same thing. And basically, it was more kind of influences by things, like the Star Wars of the world, more sci-fi than normal. And it would feature a protagonist that was half human, half alien, and who was basically a space law enforcement officer who has access to this special armor called Electroplate. And his code name was Gavan. He was sent to Earth by the space police, who reside on this planet called Planet Bird. I know, strange name for a planet. But moving on, to stop the space crime syndicate Maku, who had started some new operations on Earth. It was pretty successful, and it spawned two more series in its own new franchise. That would be Sharivan and then Shaider. After the Space Sheriff franchise had came to an end, at least the original Space Sheriff franchise, the Metal Heroes franchise was born from this, and ever after that, they basically continued on with individual standalone shows. This would continue straight through to from the Showa era to the Heisei era, basically ending in 1998 with It That Shall Not Be Named, and has recently, after a television hiatus, has actually returned in movie form more recently in 2012 with the Gavan vs. Gokaiger film. So Space Sheriff was back and alive and well. Genji Oba would reprise his role, and then later on, the success of that movie would lead them in to make the individual Space Sheriff Gavan movie, which would feature a successor to the original Gavan in Gavan Type G, which simultaneously also appeared. He also appeared in 2 episodes of the Super Sentai series Go Busters, and then later on the characters would reappear. There are new Shaider and a new Sharivan was also introduced in that movie, successors for both of those mantles, and they would all three would reappear again in the Superhero Taisen Z film. Then more recently, the other 2 successor characters, Sharivan and Shaider, got their own 2 individual standalone movies that link together, and that's the most recent use of the Metal Heroes / Gokaiger Space Sheriff, Space Sheriff franchise. The ways that the Metal Heroes franchise kind of differs from Kamen Rider and from Super Sentai, it's an interesting little middle ground. Like I said before, it's more influenced by, more typical sci-fi of the time, more American sci-fi, stuff like that. But also a distinctive thing is that the heroes tend to be some form of law enforcement of some kind more often than not. In some certain instances, they're actually not human. They're, androids and things of that nature. And they don't really stick to any visual aesthetic theme over time. They've changed a lot of premises, looks. Some have been ninjas. Some have been just robots and other things like that. And they don't typically use giant monster concepts like Super Sentai does. I mean, Just Beyond kind of had a gimmick where he would fight mega beasts, but they would start as giant beasts. They wouldn't really grow into things. They were just large beasts and stuff like that. And the formula that was kind of started in the Gavan series, basically, like, the hero would fight the monster or the lieutenants and such, and eventually midway through, they would be thrown into this pocket dimension that was designed to basically make their enemies stronger. So in Gavan, the enemies, they would go to Maku space, and basically the Maku space would make the enemies 3 times stronger than what they were in normal space. Also, the Metal Heroes franchise utilizes a lot of vehicles, motorcycles, tanks. In the Space Sheriff franchise, their bases kind of like are what transported their suits onto their bodies. And also the bases, that there were starships, there were also mecha, there were also dragons, or any stuff like that. Hell, one of them in Shaiders can turn into a giant cannon, like a giant magnum. It was freaking cool. But yeah, so pretty much that's how they kind of like differentiate themselves aesthetically. They didn't really go for the insectoid like design, so it has a more sci-fi armory kind of look. And they had the whole laser blade concept with the fact that it's a metal blade, it turns to a laser blade, things like that. And that's kind of like the little trinkets, little things that they do that kind of differentiate themselves. There's been other changes in premise. Sometimes, the heroes will take more roles of rescuers more so than officers, and somehow they'll save people from fires and all this kind of stuff. In some shows, they won't even fight monsters; they'll just fight regular people that are kind of just doing terrorist attacks, and they would kind of just try to thwart their attacks. So they played around with the formula quite a bit in different shows. So it doesn't always, you don't always kind of get the same thing more often than not. Space Sheriff's the only one that kind of stays consistent in the kind of tropes and formats that they tend to do. Content-wise, Space Sheriff kind of falls into that same vein as Kamen Rider Super Sentai in the 80s and early 90s. They do have certain, mature premises in terms of violence and death, and human death, and stuff of that nature. And basically what you would normally expect from these type of shows in the Toei banner of the time. More often than not, they tend to stay consistent in that. Of the two that I shall not name, I think they went more kid-friendly. I've never personally watched them, and I probably never will. But more, the vast majority of it basically has that kind of content premise. Not what you would normally put on American child programming. Thank God for that. Continuity-wise, the Metal Heroes franchise is a little bit more loose than Super Sentai and Kamen Rider. Like, in reality, there's only like 1 or 2 shows that really link into each other. The rest seem to kind of just take place in a general world. The Metal Heroes franchise, however, shares the same universe as Super Sentai. The Gavan vs. Gokaiger movie pretty much proved it. And basically for Metal Heroes itself, all the Space Sheriff stuff is linked. So if you start watching them, Gavan through Shaider, in that order, Gavan, Sharivan, Shaider, the original. The more recent stuff for the Space Sheriff stuff, of course, they're the successors. They're the ones that took the mantles after the original characters retired. But it still links. It's a continuation of the original 3 shows. The only other show that really has any continuity with itself is the B Fighter series, which is B Fighter then B Fighter Kabuto. They link to each other, and they take place, of course, probably in the same exact world as everything Metal Hero. So Metal Heroes generally shares the same exact world as Super Sentai. All right, we're at the portion of the possible misconceptions to tackle portion of all this. Might as well clear the air and get this out the way to prevent this comparison from happening, because Western fans, namely Americans, tend to regurgitate this line. It's just a fact. I've dealt with it, so let's get that one out the way. The Metal Heroes franchise is not Japanese Power Rangers. I know, I had to say that a lot, but it needs to be said. Basically, of course, Metal Heroes started with Space Sheriff Gavan in '82. Power Rangers was adapted from Super Sentai in the '90s. There you go. The other possible misconceptions that could happen is the Metal Heroes franchise is not a Japanese spin-off of VR Troopers. And it damn sure ain't a Japanese spin-off of Big Bad Beetleborgs. I hate that show. So no, those are just adaptations of different Metal Heroes franchises. Although on a side keynote, I feel like noting it anyway, VR Troopers itself is actually comprised of, I think, 3 different Metal Hero shows to make one show. It's comprised of Metalder, Spielbahn, and Shaider. So 3 shows to make one show. Kind of weird little experiment they did there, but I guess that's how they wanted their Power Ranger-y kind of team thing. So they messed around with that. Oh yes, and the final big possible misconception: Zaidu is not canon. Zaidu is not a continuation of Shaider. Sorry, Filipinos, it's not. That was just some weird gimmick that country did to find a backdoor to exploit the fact that they had the television distribution rights to Space Sheriff Shaider. Somehow, I don't know how they did it, but they snuck it in and basically made an unofficial sequel to Shaider, which is just dreadful. It's horrible. Toei has never acknowledged it as canon, and thank God for that. Thank Toei for that. Thank you. Thank you, Toei. So yeah, Zaidu's not real, man. It's just a bad visual fan fiction that I'm glad is in a grave somewhere. Okay, closing segment here and possible recommendations. The Metal Heroes franchise is a little bit more trickier to do recommendations for because a lot of the original shows are just difficult to find or not fully subbed or some. I mean, the one I know is 100% finished and is really good. Is pretty good. Is Metalder. Metalder is 100% finished, and that one is easy to find. So that's one of the few ones that they started a subtitle project for it and actually finished it. And I'm gonna double check if it's on a certain site. If I can find it on that site, I'll provide the link to that. The original Space Sheriff series is a bit more tricky because no one has officially finished subbing it. It's kind of like online. It exists as a division of English fan subs and the imported unofficial English subbing, which is basically just like people on the Chinese or Korean market or whatever the hell translating Japanese to English. Mileage may vary on that one. You may have to correct several words as you're watching it. I've been through worse in that regard. I tried VO. I originally got most of these on VO.com. I don't know if they're still there. They're probably not. So those are really tricky. The modern stuff, luckily, they exist in their own narrative sense. So starting with the Gavan Gokaiger film, I guess is a safe bet. It's pretty much the modernized version, but has a lot of the original series flair still attached to it, and they kept the design exactly the same. So, and it kind of just, it doesn't really hammer you over the head with the original concepts too much, but it is kind of a continuation. It's like a loose continuation of the original series. The individual Gavan film, which pretty much tells the story of Type G, be best to watch that after Gavan versus Gokaiger, because it makes, because that's when the successor storyline starts. Do yourself a favor, for the 2 Go Busters episodes, watch those episodes after the Gavan film, because in reality, when you look at the narrative, it makes the most sense that way. because he just gets his mantle in that movie, and then he already has the experience when he comes in to the Go Busters episodes. He knows he's more confident all of a sudden. So it's like, oh, that means he's been Gavan for a while, and so on and so forth. And then from there, the superhero Tyson stuff, and then the individual Sharivan and Shaider movies. So so if you wanted to just do the current day Space Sheriff stuff, it's fairly open to you. So you can go straight with that. It is cool to watch the original series. I enjoyed watching them. I still recommend, if you can get your hands on any of them, I recommend those if you can find them. But for sake of convenience, the modern day reintroduction of these characters are the easiest to find. Also, there's a fan project that's at least up to 14 episodes in Janperson, which is actually pretty good. I love that fucking car. pretty good. So that's the other one, I guess. I could also recommend. This team has finished subtitle projects before. I mean, Just Beyond does exist as a fan sub, but I don't really like that series much, so I can't recommend it because of the simple fact that it kind of strays away from the proven formula that Space Sheriff started. In a sense that, yeah, he has a laser blade, yeah, he has the vehicles, but he almost rarely fights anything on the ground, and it just feels like a bunch of missed opportunities. And the giant robot fights with the Mega Beasts, they're okay, but they're not as good as what they've done already in Super Sentai. So it kind of just doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it gets over either way. And the weird, odd sense of humor that they kind of throw in doesn't really work. So I don't recommend that at all. Really, it's not good for a first impression of the Shawa iteration of Metal Heroes. So yeah, that's basically a quick rundown of everything. Hopefully this vid is fairly helpful to you. Share it with anybody you need to share it with, and there you go. I also have info vids, if you haven't seen them before, of Kamen Rider Super Sentai. You can check those out on my channel. At some point in time, I do plan to tackle Garo. At some point in time, I'm going to do info vid for that too. I'm not giving any due dates on that, but that is in the pipeline. Alright guys, I'll see you guys around, and keep those minds open.